think we'll start now. Thank you for waiting. Hello, my name is Julie Roberts and I'm one of the student advisors here at King's College London. I'm one of a group of staff that are here to help you with practical matters that might come up whilst you're here studying. And so we wanted to take some time today to just draw your attention to some key things that we think a lot of our EU, EEA or Swiss national students want to know about whilst they're here. So there's quite a few different little things we're going to go over. A lot of it's about signposting, giving you information so you can find out more even when necessary, and come and book in to see one of us if your situation is quite complicated and you want to find out more about your own personal circumstances. So these are the key things we're going to look at today. We're going to look at living in the UK as an EU, EEA national and your rights to be here. Some information around using our health services that we think will be useful for you. Funding your studies. It's an area that we get a lot of queries on. It can be quite complicated. So we wanted to just give you some an outline of what's available and what you might be able to access whilst you're here. And finally, working. If you want to work here, what are some key information, what's key that you need to know about in order to allow you to work in the UK? Okay. So firstly, of course, we want to welcome you. We're really pleased to see you. It's a very odd time within the EU at the moment, with the UK planning their exit from the EU. And so it may be a time of quite a lot of uncertainty for you. So we wanted to reassure you on a couple of issues that we can be sure about. Obviously, there's still a lot of detail that needs to be ironed out for us to actually leave the EU. But right now, we know that if you start your course in 2016, there are no plans to change the immigration rules that help to determine your rights to be here. So we can rely on those rules right now for the duration of your course. There's no immediate plan to change the tuition fees charged to EU nationals. You may or may not know, but if you're an EU national, often you'll attract the same fee charge as a UK national. Some EEA, some Swiss nationals may also qualify. So right now, there's no change. If you are here and your fees have been assessed for the same as the home students, that should remain the same for the duration of your course. And finally, if you're someone who can access government funding to help you with your course, again, it's been confirmed that that provision will remain until the end of your course. So some sense of reassurance for our students coming in 2016, but unfortunately there is a lot of change that the UK will go through that we are, as even staff here, are unable to predict. So on that note, we just wanted to reinforce your position here so you're aware of the rules that help to govern your stay here in the UK. Now, within the EU regulations, Europeans have free movement around those countries, and you can have an unrestricted right to that movement for up to 3 months. Okay, so everybody can move around from one country to another without any extra restriction for up to 3 months. But after 3 months, in order to be staying lawfully, you have to meet certain categories. You have to become what's called a qualifying person. And these are the categories that you might be required to meet. You might be here as the capacity of a student, an employed person or self-employed person, someone who's here under the self-sufficiency rules, or you're the relevant family member of someone who's meeting one of those top 3 statuses. Now, each of these types of qualifying person have rules regulating what conditions they must meet in order to be able to stay longer than 3 months. So we're going to focus on the student status. Of course, if you think that you're coming here under a different category, then please do look at the rules in more detail to make sure that you're meeting all the requirements of that category. But we're going to concentrate on students because obviously I suspect that's the majority of the people in the audience. So after 3 months, to be able to rely on your student status, you have to be an EU or an EEA or Swiss national, enrolled for the main purpose of education. You must be able to support yourself financially. And something that gets missed quite often, and something that we really want to emphasize, is there is a requirement that you have taken some sort of provision to help towards any health costs that you may incur whilst here. Now, the most simple way to do that is to apply for what's called a European Health Insurance Card, an EHIC card. These are available within the EU countries, within the EEA countries and Switzerland. They're free. You apply and basically you receive a card which you can then use if you're traveling around Europe, and if you ever have to use any health services, this is your card that you show, and then you will not be asked to pay personally. Now, this is free, this is easy to get hold of, and it has a couple of years duration, so it should see you through whilst you're studying. But if for some reason you don't get one of these, you're not eligible, you do not apply for one, then you need to take a comprehensive sickness insurance to cover any health costs. Now that's a private health insurance, that's something that you would probably buy online, and it needs to cover you for the majority of health risks. It's not free, so you do have to pay for it. So this is why we really strongly encourage you to find out more about the EHIC card and make sure that you apply so you have use of this, okay? There's an app that you can download which tells you a lot more about this card, so that might be a good way of reminding yourself that you need to take care of this. And it may be that throughout your duration here, nobody asks you to prove these points that we've just covered. Most likely you won't have to. But because of all the change here in the UK, because of us leaving Europe, it's just better that you are aware of the requirements you must meet and that you meet them, so you don't end up having any issues should further down the line there'll be a lot more sort of upheaval with us leaving Europe. Similarly, we sometimes see students that come to study with us who then decide that they'd like to stay in the UK, perhaps get some form of permanent residence whilst they're here, and these are the kinds of things that they will need to demonstrate in order to be able to access that kind of status. When they make a formal application, they'll be asked to show that they've met the conditions of their stay. So it's really important right from the start to be aware of these conditions and to make sure you meet them so that there won't be any nasty surprises further down the line. Okay? So as I say, we just wanted to highlight that. Sometimes it is assumed that because we're all sharing Europe that we can just move around freely, but there are some restrictions, there are some rules that we all have to adhere to when we're moving around and staying long term in a particular country. So just moving on again about some of the key things around your health. We wanted to just flag up the need for you to register with a doctor as soon as possible. This is just something that we just want to put on your to-do list because it is something that can easily be forgotten. And of course, when you're not well and you need to access medical help, there's nothing worse than having to try to organise administration like this when you're not feeling at your best. So whilst you're well, please register for a doctor, and that way you can access it even when you ever need to use a doctor. Now here at King's we have our own medical centre that you're free to join, and it's based at the Strand campus. Now it might be that you decide that that's too far away, that's not local enough for you, in which case you can join other doctors' practices, other GP practices local to where you live. On our website, if you search under Medical Centre, you'll find very good information about joining our centre, as well as how to register with other GP surgeries. So it will tell you how to search for local surgeries within your area, and the kinds of things that you'll need to be able to take along to your appointment, like your ID, proof of address, etc. So it's a really good resource, and so I would strongly recommend that you make a point to look on these pages and start that process right now before you actually ever need to use any health services here. Okay. For your information, if you ever need emergency help, if you need help from an ambulance, the police, the fire brigade, for example, then here we use the number 999 to access those services. But they are for emergencies only. If, on the other hand, you have a non-emergency health issue and you want to maybe check some symptoms, find out what's the best sort of process for you to go through if you're feeling unwell, then we have a new number, 111. And that's for non-emergencies, and it can be useful for reassurance and for guidance about how to cope in certain health situations. So again, please just take a note of those numbers, keep them to hand, and then if ever you do need to access any of these kinds of services, you're aware where to turn. So student funding. Very popular subject. We see a lot of students on this subject, and it can be quite confusing because there's just a lot of different funds and different information, different eligibility criteria, and so it can be difficult to work out exactly where you sit with these kinds of funds. So I wanted to cover some brief information on this. Now we're going to have differences between undergrad funding and postgrad funding. So I'm going to cover the undergraduates first, and then we'll move on to the postgraduates. Okay? After that, I'll look at some of the NHS funding for courses that are for health-related courses where you might get funding from a third body. So we'll cover that at the end. So when you enroll, obviously there are two main things that you need to think about in terms of your finances. You need to think about how you're going to meet the tuition fees that will be charged and the living costs. Now, as I said earlier, if you're an EU national, then usually you can expect to pay the same fee as a home student, and for 2016, that's £9,000 for an undergraduate year. Now, at King's, we would like you to pay or have your fees organised by the 31st of January. So if you are still organising that side of things, you'd still have time. We're not going to ask you to meet this cost until the 31st of January. Okay? Now, like many of our home students, our EU undergraduates might want to rely on what's called a fee loan to help them pay this cost. Now, a fee loan is available through an organisation called Student Finance England, and if you're eligible, you can apply and ask basically for that organisation to pay your fees to King's on your behalf, and you then repay once you stop studying. So this stops you having to personally pay and buys you some time to organise repayment once you're working, once you've completed your course. Now, there eligibility rules. So people do have to meet certain conditions in order to qualify for this fee loan. The rules relate to your nationality. So please note that this is available to EU students or their relevant family members. So it's not extending to those countries that form the EEA, so not Norway, Liechtenstein, Iceland, or Switzerland. It's EU nationals or their relevant family members. And relevant family members generally means spouse or child. Now, just like any immigration type rules, it can be a little bit more complicated than that. So if you think that you might need to rely on this rule as a relevant family member, look at the detail a little bit more of what constitutes a relevant family member and come and speak to an advisor if you want some more clarity on that. But generally, it's our spouses and our children that tend to rely on this provision. So you need to be an EU national and you need to have residence within the EEA or Switzerland for at least 3 years before the start of this course. So they'll ask about your addresses to determine whether you're eligible. And that residency within those countries cannot solely be for the purpose of full-time education. So an example might be if you have a French national who, when young, moves away with their parents to live in Canada, for example, and when they turn 16, perhaps they've returned back to France to continue with their education, perhaps they've gone to a further education college, some sort of education. They then think about coming to study here at King's and want to rely on this loan. They may find that they're ineligible because they've moved into the EU again solely for the purpose of full-time education. So that's the kind of thing that they mean by the purpose rule. So if you're a French national and you've lived in France for all your life, you've gone through school in France, that's all fine. You weren't there for the purpose of education, that was your home. So that's the distinction there. Okay. Now there are also what's called the previous study rules as well that might determine if you're eligible for this fee loan. If you've already studied elsewhere, anywhere in the world, and you already hold a degree, then you may find again that you're ineligible for this funding. It's set aside for people's first degrees. If you've studied elsewhere but didn't complete the course, then you may well be eligible, but it's very important, I would suggest, to come and see an advisor so we can talk through your eligibility with you if you're planning on relying on this, okay? So any previous study, do come and speak to us so we can just check your eligibility, your entitlements. So that was the fee loans. That's how a lot of our EU students pay their fees. Now, of course, if you don't want to take the fee loan, you can pay personally. And you need to pay the full amount by the 31st of January 2017. Okay? You could also opt to take part of the fee loan and pay a proportion yourself and rely on the fee loan, a proportion of the fee loan. So it's quite flexible if that's what you'd prefer. But now we're thinking about living costs. You've got a whole myriad of things that you need to take care of to be able to stay here and study. And so we get a lot of questions around whether there's any help towards those kinds of costs. And for some, there might be. For many, there isn't. So some students can access fee loans and maintenance loans. Again, it's from Student Finance England. And there are a lot more restrictions on who can access these maintenance loans. So generally, if you're an EU national and you've been resident in the UK for at least 5 years, so that's resident in the UK for at least 5 years before you start this course, then you can access the maintenance funds just like a home student. This rules recently changed. It used to require residence for 3 years, but around March 2016 it changed to 5. Okay? We also have another category of student that might qualify for these funds, and that's the EEA or Swiss Migrant Worker, or relevant family member. Now, a migrant worker is someone that is here working whilst studying. And they have to remain working even whilst they're studying. They can be a national of the EEA or Switzerland. So unlike the fee loan, this can now extend to the Norwegians, Icelandics, Swiss, etc. Again, there has to be residence within the EEA or Switzerland before the start of the course or before the move to the UK. And again, it can't be for the purpose of full-time education, that residence within the EEA or Switzerland. But crucially, if you're going to rely on this category to access the funding, you need to be able to demonstrate that you were in the UK on or before the 1st of September 2016. So they're trying to distinguish between people that are coming just to study and people that have been here working and who will be working and studying at the same time. Now that work can be as a self-employed person or employed, and it can be full-time or part-time. There are rules around what constitutes enough hours, and generally, if it's anything lower than around 12, perhaps you might have trouble convincing the authorities that they could define you as a worker. But it's a complicated area, and again, I think we're flagging this up to you. Have a look in more detail. I'll give you some useful websites at the end, and then come and see an advisor if you want to clarify anything. EEA Swiss nationals can access work here without any restriction, so you can choose to work. You do not need any special permission unless you're from Croatia. So if you're a Croatian national, I'm afraid you do need to register with the government here first before you're permitted to work. So again, at the end, there's useful sites. Please look into that, make sure you're aware, and that you don't end up working illegally because you haven't taken your registration. So just let's look at what living cost support is available. If you are fortunate enough to be able to access the living cost support, then we distinguish between those that live with their parents while studying and those that live away from their parents. So if you're living away from parents and studying, you can access a higher amount of loan than those that are living with parents. And that's generally because the expectation is you'll have less expense if you live with your parents. When you're living away from your parents, you're usually paying your own rent, and that's quite a chunk of money, so you get a higher rate of loan. So the maximum that someone can access if they're living away from parents studying here is £10,702. So it's quite a substantial amount of money and a very useful amount to help you with rent, travel, books, etc. Now you'll notice on my slide I have maximum and minimum amounts of loan. The government say that if you're eligible for the funding, you can access at least the minimum amount. To gain the maximums, to gain anything between 5,330 up to 10,702, you need to give evidence and information about your parents' financial details first. And that will help to determine the amount of funds the government make available to you. So, for example, if you apply for this and your parents are millionaires, you can access £5,330. No problem. However, because of their income, that's probably the most that you'll attract. Whereas if you're applying and you give evidence that your parents' income is below £25,000 for the year, then the likelihood is you'll access the full amount of £10,702. So when applying for these living costs funds, there is an onus on you to give family income details if you want to access the maximum amounts. You don't have to. You can choose just to take the minimum and bypass giving family income details. But as I say, that means that you can lose money potentially. When you're an EU national and you're applying for these funds, it can be quite complicated because there's forms that parents fill out, and those forms are very much directed to the UK student. They're asking questions that probably mean nothing to you and to your families at home. The key thing is you need to be able to demonstrate what your family income was from all sources. And for those starting in 2016, they're interested in what was the family income during the tax year 2014-15. Okay. So here in the UK, we hold formal documents from our employers that tell us exactly what our yearly income was. If you're self-employed, you have something similar from the tax authorities, and you guys will have similar things in your own home country. Those are the kinds of things they're looking for. So that just gives you an idea, a flavour of the funds that are available and who may be able to access them. So now postgraduates. Now your fees vary according to your course, and generally you're expected to pay 50% of your fee by the 31st of October and 50% by the 31st of January. If you are being sponsored and an external body is paying your fees, so maybe a government body or a company, then please make us aware by sending evidence to our finance team at Credit Control. Send it nice and early, and then they can update your record and make sure they invoice the correct place. Now, as I said, generally you must pay within these 2 instalment dates, and they are pretty fixed. But we've just recently had a change this last week where finance here are prepared to make a different instalment arrangement for postgraduates who are relying on our new government postgraduate loan that's available from 2016. So, this year, for the first time, the government here have provided funds for postgraduate study. They were very good at giving money, loans to our undergraduate students, but there was never anything for postgrad students. But from 2016, we now have a new funding stream, and it's known as the postgraduate loan. It's for those studying a postgraduate degree level course. It is not available to anyone who's doing a course that's below a degree level. So, for example, if you're doing some sort of postgraduate diploma, then I'm afraid this isn't available. And equally, if you're doing anything above the degree level, if you're going to do a PhD, for example, again, right now, we don't have any funding through our government to help with that. Student Finance England, again, are looking after the applications for this new fund. And if you're eligible, you can apply for up to £10,000 towards course costs. Now, on the undergraduate funding, we talked about having fee loans and maintenance loans. It was very specific what the funds were for. Whereas for this new fund, the postgraduate loan, they allow you to access £10,000 towards course costs. So basically they're giving you a free rein as to where you then use that money. I'll take questions at the end. It's an online application, and it's available for full-time students and many of our part-time courses, although there are some restrictions. So again, you need to look at the finer detail. And this time, if you're eligible, they will pay the money directly to you, and then, as I said, you look after your expenses from this pot of money. So if you apply for the £10,000, you can expect to receive a third of that in the first term, if you're a full-time student, a third in the second term, so another payment in January, and then usually one in April. So that's how they're going to pay you. Now, as I said earlier, it used to be that we expected postgraduates to pay their fees in full by the 31st of January. And that doesn't sit well with the instalments that this new loan is paid in. So this new change is directed at students who are accessing this new postgraduate loan. If you want to rely on that loan to pay your fees, you can ask the university now to extend your tuition fee instalment plan to take into account your payment dates. What Credit Control here have asked is that you email them with your name, your student number, and a copy of your assessment letter from Student Finance England showing your payment amount and your payment dates. And then they'll use that to adjust your tuition fee instalment deadline with us. Okay? So that's really positive. That's a great change that we've just seen come through, and should mean that this postgraduate loan is a lot more sort of user-friendly within our system here. So, who is eligible for the postgraduate loan? Now again, they are aiming this at people who are taking their first postgraduate degree. So if you already hold a postgraduate degree or higher qualification, then I'm afraid, again, this will be, you will be ineligible for this new fund. Similarly, you're ineligible if you're 60 or above at the time when you apply. I think you're all okay. And it is available to EU nationals. So if you can show that you were an EU national and you were resident within the EEA and Switzerland before the start of the course for at least 3 years, or you were in the UK, and that residence was not for the purpose of education solely, then this could be a fund that you'll find very useful whilst you're here studying on your postgraduate course. Similarly, migrant workers can access this fund. So if you're a Norwegian, Icelandic, etc., then there's access to this if you are able to meet the worker rules, which we talked about earlier. And another group that can qualify are children of Swiss nationals, where their parents are exercising their free movement rights in the UK. So again, I just want to emphasize that it can be quite difficult to just summarize some of this immigration information in nice, concise little slides. So do look at all the fine detail to check you're eligible, and come and see us if you have any questions. Now, some of you may be on courses that attract a whole different set of funds, just to, as I say, make it more complicated and confuse everybody. We have courses here that we sort of describe as NHS-funded courses, NHS courses, National Health Service courses. And so typically they may be nursing, midwifery, It may be something like dietetics, some of the therapist type courses, physiotherapy, courses like that. Now, if you're on a course like this, actually you don't rely on that Student Finance England fund that we've gone through. You have to apply to another organisation called the NHS Bursary, Student Bursary Unit. Now, if you are on a course like this, one of the big benefits of being on that course is that if you are eligible, the NHS here will pay your fee on your behalf, so you don't have to pay yourself, you don't have to access a loan to pay it, they pay that part for you. So that's a very positive aspect of being on one of these courses. And so EU nationals may well qualify for this help. But just like with Student Finance England, they also have living cost support available to some students. And eligibility rules are very, very similar to the Student Finance England rules. So many of our EU nationals will only qualify for help with their fees, but some may qualify for the full package of living cost support. At the end, I give a website address for this organisation, so you might want to have a look and test whether you're eligible. They've got very good eligibility calculators on there, so you can fill in certain information, and it should help to guide you about what funds you can access. Now, unlike the Student Finance England funding, this kind of course does not have a previous study restriction. So we sometimes see students who have taken a degree in, say, history, and then come back into education to become a nurse, a midwife, etc., etc. And they then access all the funding for the NHS type courses. They're not stopped because they already hold a degree. There's going to be a lot of change around funding for these guys next year, but if you're starting a course this year and you attract this NHS funding, you'll keep that funding throughout the duration of your course. So that was a little summary of some of the funds that some students can access. As I say, it's not easy to kind of give all the fine detail, but at least now I'm hoping that you've got some kind of sense of where you sit, and you can look into things in a little bit more detail if necessary, and check with advisors where it's complicated. So we wanted to flag up some more information around work, because people do rely on work when they're coming here to study. And so there's just some key things that we wanted to set out, make you aware of, helpful information. Here in the UK, we have what's known as the national minimum wage. And this is a wage that all employers are expected to pay their employees at the very least. So no employer should be employing a worker and paying them less than these minimum wage amounts. Hopefully they're paying more, but this is the very minimum that they're allowed to pay their workers. So if you're going to be taking casual work, perhaps working in bars, shops perhaps, this kind of thing, these are the kinds of amounts that you might attract as on a casual kind of contract. The amount is going to go up in October, but only by a few pence here and there. But it's just important to be aware that there is a minimum, and if you are told that you'll be attracting a lower amount, that's illegal and you should take advice, okay? 0-hour contracts. We wanted to flag those up because they're very popular with employers here in the UK, and they can be very useful for the student population, but there are some people that this will not suit. So we wanted to just make you aware of what they are, and you can then think about how that fits in for your own circumstances. So a 0-hour contract is where an employer does agree to employ you, but does not specify how many hours you're expected to work from one week to the next. So the advert will not say we would like somebody for 21 hours a week, for example. These contracts are flexible, so they allow the employer to basically agree that they will call you when they need you. And that might be a lot, that might be a little. It may be flexible, that it works around your course and you enjoy that kind of flexibility, or it might be that you are dependent on this work to pay your bills. You are needing a certain number of hours, a certain amount of pay to pay the rent. If you go into a contract like this, there is no guarantee that you're going to meet those amounts, those hours. The employer does not have to call you. Perhaps you've turned them down a couple of times and you find that you're way down their list when they're calling people. These are kinds of things that can happen in practice. So just be aware that they're around. They're particularly around hospitality and bar work, shop work. They're looking at trying to get more people in when they're at their busiest. And so that's the kind of place you might find these 0-hour contracts. If you're relying on work, as I say, you might want to avoid them and just keep looking for the kinds of work that's going to suit you, because there is nothing worse than relying on this to pay your bills and obviously things aren't working out. So just be aware that they're around and determine for yourself whether that's going to suit you. Tax and national insurance. We get a lot of students saying, well, I'm a student and so I don't pay tax. That's what I understand, students don't pay tax. But that's not quite right. All employees are liable to tax and national insurance here. National insurance is an extra amount that the government take from our wages, and they then use that for key things such as funding the health service, funding police, all the kinds of services that we rely on. They take this extra money from us and use that. So everybody's liable for these things, but we are allowed to keep a certain amount of income here before we are charged tax and national insurance. And that's generally around £11,000 for the year. So it might be, as a student, you don't pay tax or national insurance because your income is low. But you might have some periods where you're working quite a lot, your money is increased, and you might find that you're taxed or you're paying national insurance. That is not unusual. When the deductions are being made, they're usually basing it on the monthly income that you're attracting. And if you're earning having a particularly good month, you might find the tax and national insurance comes out, even though overall you haven't earned the £11,000 over the year. But that's because the system can't necessarily determine what your income's going to be month on month. So if you've got a good month, it might presume that that's going to be typical, and so the tax, the national insurance will come out. At the end of the year, you will get a refund of anything that you've overpaid. So it does even out eventually. So I just wanted to make that point because sometimes, as I say, people are quite upset or confused by being taxed when they're on a low income. National insurance numbers. This is a unique number that you are given, and the government, the authorities can then use that to kind of identify you, to track you type thing. And so all UK nationals are given a national insurance number. It's what they then use to help determine your tax and your your national insurance liabilities, etc. Now, as EU nationals coming into the UK, you won't have one. And unless you're planning to work, you don't need one. So if you're applying for student loans, they do ask if you have a national insurance number. You're not compelled to have one, but if you go ahead and get one at any point, they would like to know your number. So you can apply for the funds here from Student Finance England. Even though you don't have a national insurance number, you should still be paid, all should be fine. If you're planning to work, an employer will ask for your national insurance number because, as I said, it links into the tax system, etc. So you need to apply for a national insurance number. And there's a helpline number that you can ring, and they can then organise an appointment for you at one of the local government offices, ask you to bring in certain information about your ID, your address, etc. And a number will be generated for you. Okay. Now at the end, I've given an email, a web address where again you can find more specific detail on that kind of thing. So there's no compulsion to have a national insurance number, but if you are planning to work, then yes, please organise a national insurance number. Now, at King's, on the 6th of October, we are having a part-time work fair. So if you're thinking of work, this could be a good place to go to try and hook up with potential employers, find out more about accessing work whilst you're studying here. It's going to be held at our Strand campus. So if you're not unfamiliar, perhaps start thinking about how you might access the other campuses, because sometimes you do need to. You could have a look at the health centre while you're there, this kind of thing. But if you need any more information, go onto our website, type in careers, and all their information should come up, and it will include more on this event. I'm sure it will be very busy, and it's very popular each year. But we just wanted to flag up the importance of being very, considerate of the work-study balance. If you are going to rely on work to help you through with some of your bills, etc., do be careful about being too reliant on work, and in the end, that impacting on your study, on the opportunities that you have within the institution. It's so important that you are enrolling with confidence that you can meet all the expenses that you've got ahead of you. Because where we see students who are unsure, who need to work long hours, they do find it particularly stressful. They start to find that their studies are negatively impacted upon. And so it's just really important to just get that balance right. Now, when we talked about the funds available from our government here, we said they were loans, maintenance loans and tuition fee loans, postgraduate loans. So unfortunately, they do need to be repaid. Now, if you're an undergrad, once you stop studying, you're usually expected to go into the repayment process from the April after you graduate. So if you stop studying in July 2019, then from the April 2020, the system will start to expect repayment of these loans. Now, if you are working in the UK at that point, you will start repaying once your earnings are £21,000 or more. Earlier, we talked about applying for a national insurance number, and this is the kind of thing that Student Finance England will use to help determine what amounts you start to repay. So they will be contacting, or they will be setting things up through the tax office here, and the tax office will be aware of your income and will trigger payments when your monthly, your weekly, your income suggests that you're on that £21,000 threshold. Now, they want you to pay back, they require you to pay back 9% of your earnings above £21,000. So an example here is if you're earning £30,000, you're going to have a deduction from your wages of £67 a month. So the more you earn, the higher the amount that you repay. It's 9% of earnings above £21,000. If you go below that figure of 21,000, then there'll be no deduction. So it's very much linked to your salary. Now, if you're not working in the UK, there are arrangements that you must meet in order to start the repayment from abroad. And on the website, they give a whole list of countries and what the rules around repayment are for those specific countries. So they're looking at what they think is the equivalent kind of level of salary when they're looking at the cost of living, etc. So if you're going to be leaving the UK, having taken some of the undergraduate funding here, then there is still an expectation that you'll repay, and you'll have to make that provision directly with Student Finance England. Okay? Now, they ask for 9% of your earnings above 21,000 or the equivalent in your country. You can make extra payments if you like. They're very happy to receive extra. And there is interest charged on these loans, and so it might be that you feel it's in your interest to try and pay as quickly as you can. But if you leave it to the system, then these are the guidelines that you've signed up to. And if you get to the end of 30 years and there's still a balance outstanding, the government write that off. I always wonder whether people want to try and achieve that and see how long they can go without having to pay. For postgraduates, as I said, it's a new scheme, so the systems are still being updated, and so the consequence of that is that you will start repayment from April 2019. So if you take a loan out this year in 2016, you've actually got quite a way before the processes will start to kick in. Again, you can pay earlier if you prefer, but this is the point where suddenly your income will start to attract the repayment. Now, you're going to be paying back 6% of your earnings above 21,000, so a slightly lower amount. But if you're somebody who's taken the undergrad loan and the postgraduate loan, then you will be paying both funds back at the same time. So actually, you'll be paying 15% of your earnings over the £21,000 threshold. So a postgrad on a £30,000 income here in the UK will be paying back something like £45 a month. So the idea, hopefully, is that it's very helpful to help you access higher education, this loan, and the repayments hopefully do not feel too much of a burden. So finally, we've talked a lot about money and accessing money, etc., but we also need you to be really careful about how you spend money. We strongly, strongly recommend you do look after your money very carefully, and that you are very good with your money management skills. We often say, take control of your finances before they control you. You know, if you're not careful, you can easily overspend at the beginning of of the term and find it incredibly difficult at the end, particularly if you're attracting some of these funds that we've talked about for your living costs. You get paid in termly amounts, in lump sums, and you don't get another payment for quite some time. So you need to know exactly how much money you have, what it's got to cover, and how long it's got to cover you for. So to help our students here at King's, we've teamed up with an organisation called Black Bullion, and they are specialists in promoting and educating young people around money and money management. So again, on your to-do list, please register with Black Bullion. Use your student ID to register and start going through their modules to just make sure that you are really clued up about money and anything associated. Unfortunately, in the role that I'm in, I see a lot of people who are brilliant students but not very good with their money, and suddenly they're finding that their studies are really severely impacted just because of money problems. So despite the fact that they should be getting great qualifications, the stress, the strain, the upset about money, not being able to pay rent on time, having bills, mounting up, really negatively impacts on their time here. So we really, really emphasize how important money management is. We've got a lot of resources on our website, so please do take time to look at those. And we have a specific money advisor who has drop-in sessions throughout the university where you can come, just check you're getting all that you're entitled to. Perhaps you've drawn up a budget and you just wanted someone to check it over, see whether that looks reasonable. You might see in your budget that you've got periods that are a bit shaky. Maybe you need some advice about how to maybe reduce some of your costs. Check you've got all the discounts in place. That's what we're there for. So come and see one of the money advisors, okay? You see us as a service either through appointments. We can do one-to-one appointments where things are complicated. Maybe you'd like some confidential advice. We've got the drop-ins, as I said, which are meant for more kind of general, quick queries, not necessarily anything too complex. You'll probably be referred for an appointment in that case. We're going to be setting up a phone inquiry line, so it might be that you just want to call in and just get a quick piece of advice, guidance. And we have information sheets. We're forever writing things to try and, emphasize the importance of key things that we know students worry about or need extra guidance on. So do look on our site for all of those types of helpful hints. Externally, as I say, there are some really useful places for you to go away and look at now. If you're looking at the government funding from Student Finance England, then www.gov.uk/student finance is the starting point for you. If you're on an NHS type course, then it's the NHS BSA site. UKAISA, that's a very generic site, and it's targeted to students coming from abroad studying in England. So it deals with just about anything and everything that you might want further information on. It will give you more advice about your status in the UK, meeting those rules that we talked about at the beginning. There'll be information there about the eligibility criteria for the fee loans, the maintenance support. It may have more information there about working, just a whole myriad of things that are very useful for you to look at. And then finally, the gov.uk site, that's a good starting point if you want to then search for things that are more sort of formal government type things. So if you wanted to check national insurance application hotline, it can tell you about, again, immigration, work, all those kinds of things. If you just search, you should see lots of useful information on a government website there. So that's basically what we needed to cover today. Quite a lot. I hope you found that useful. As I say, some of it can be more complicated, and it's not an easy thing to just sort of say in this kind of forum, but hopefully you now have some food for thought and you know where to find more information if necessary. I'm happy to take questions. We can do that by putting your hand up, and then, you know, as the room clears, if people want to just come down and ask me anything specific, that's all good too. So yeah, what do we want? Hi. So the question was basically, there are funds available at home for this particular student that she can use to come and study here. So she can access funds from home, but can she also then access the UK funds? She's on a postgraduate course, so she's looking at the postgraduate loan. Okay, so this loan is very new, so we're still ironing out some of the finer detail. But where I've had undergraduates asking something similar, the answer has been yes, you can. The other thing I suppose actually I should thought to say is the postgraduate loan is what they call non-means tested. So when I talked about the undergraduate living cost support, I said some parts of that require family income to help determine your amount. With the postgraduate loan, it's non-means tested. Family income does not count. So if you're eligible, you can access up to £10,000 with no restriction. So, so while I was thinking that, I was thinking, well, does that income impact on the postgraduate loan? Maybe but actually it's not relevant. Your income from another place is not relevant. So I believe you're going to find you can access it.
The question is, do you want to have two students?
Yeah, you might want to take some of it, not all of it. And if you want to change your mind and take a proportion and then take more later, you can. So it can be quite flexible. But as far as I know, there's no restriction if you have money from... In fact, I'm even more convinced by that, because we've also been told if students get scholarships, you know, I'm thinking of UK students, so why it wouldn't apply to you as well. If they get scholarships from an organisation, it does not stop them accessing the loan. So it seems like it's very flexible.
What is the interest of the student loan in the UK?
Okay, so interest, it's the rate of inflation plus, I believe, 3%. So it fluctuates because of the rate of inflation, but then they add this extra. Now, that's another one of those things that don't stick in my head. And so if you're interested, again, look it up so you're really clear about what you're agreeing to in terms of the inflation, interest. Any more questions? Hi.
Hi.
If you're in a King's Hall, then you don't have to worry at all. If you are living in private halls, they may ask you to show, to bring a certain letter. So in the UK, when you live in a property, the local authority where you live charge you something called council tax. And again, it's a way of them generating money to help pay for local provision, libraries, street cleaning, rubbish collection, this kind of thing. So again, we're all expected to pay. But we do have some special rules for students. Now, if you live in a property that's a student property, like a halls of residence, then generally you don't have to worry, the building is exempt, they know it's full of students. If you live in a private hall, they may still ask you to show them that you're a student. So you can apply for a letter here at King's that confirms that you're a full-time student, and then you give that to your landlord or to your local authority, and they will then update to make sure they know who they can charge and who they don't charge. If you're living in private accommodation, So you're living maybe in a joint house with somebody, a flat, then the rules can be more complicated. Basically, if you're there in a property and there's only full-time students in that property, you get hold of one of these letters from your university, you give it to the landlord or to the local authority, and they will cancel the bill because there's only full-time students in the property. If there are non-students or non-full-time students in the property, so if you're sharing with someone who's working, for example, then that changes things. You might find that you're charged this bill. You might find that you're charged a proportion of the bill. So it is much tougher if you don't live with other full-time students. This could be an extra charge that you're expected to pay. Now, it's again a complicated area. So on the UKaiser website, it again deals with those kinds of things. And also on the King's website as well, if you were to just Google, just search council tax, we've written information sheets on it, tells you how to get the letter that you need, tells you about who might be liable for this, who doesn't. Okay. Is that helpful? Hello? I'm no tax expert, I'm afraid. Yeah. I wouldn't know the answer to that.
Where can I find that information?
Well, potentially, there might be useful information on a website that is specific for students, taxguideforstudents.org.uk. So I'd start there if I were you. Within our own tax offices, they do have helplines. Again, whether they're in any position to be able to comment on something like that, I don't know. And similarly, in your own home country, I'd suggest. Hello?
Do you have the EU migrant working law?
Yeah, so if you're trying to rely on the migrant worker category, you can be a full-time worker or a part-time worker. There's no specific regulation that says 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours is sufficient. There's no specific regulation, so it is a little bit grey. But in my experience, when Student Finance England are looking at applications, they get a little less sort of generous if you're kind of below around 10, 12. Now that's because to meet the migrant worker rules, you have to be defined as a worker, and that work should not be marginal. And so that's a term that basically suggests that it's not so small that it's kind of a bit difficult to really define you as a worker. What that is exactly is really hard to say, so I would just kind of use around the 12 hours as a bit of a guide. You know, if somebody was to reply to them and say, I do dog walking for 4 or 5 hours a week, I reckon that's going to be a difficult one to argue. But if you're working in a store and you're doing, 12 hours regularly every week, I think you're likely to get through. Now, Student Finance England do ask to see every so often to see evidence that you're still working. Because as I said earlier, it's the working that gives you the access to this fund. This is not helping EU students with their living costs. This is helping workers who are EU nationals or EEA migrant EEA nationals or Swiss nationals to access the same funds that a home nation worker can get. So within the EU, this work status is very, very sort of generous. It's the work status that gets you it. So where you might get a job, suddenly access £10,000 worth of funding from our government, think, I don't need that job anymore, that's perfect. Because probably every term They will ask you to prove you're still working, and if you can't, the funds go, and you just go back to having fee loans only. So be aware. It can catch people out when they are maybe going on a year abroad, studying abroad, because they'll have to stop working in the UK. Suddenly they haven't got that link for the living cost support anymore, so that's something that sometimes gets forgotten. And it might be that you're not the worker. You might have parents here that are working, because you can rely on your parents' work status and access these funds, because I talked about if you're a migrant worker or relevant family member. So you might be here with your mum. Your mum's been here for a couple of years. She's working. She's going to continue working. You've come to study. You're here before the 1st of September 2016. You may not get a job, but your mum's the worker, so you rely on that status and you can attract the funding. So it's quite a complicated area, but work is the key. Well, oh, yep. Yeah, so if you've taken a loan, any of the loans, and you're working, but your income doesn't hit that £21,000 level, then the government do not take any money from you. When you are repaying, they're taking it automatically out of your salary. It's linked to your national insurance number, so they know what your salary is, and so it's a little bit like an extra tax. They just take it out before you get access to it. If you're self-employed, then obviously they can't do that, so you have to arrange to make those payments yourself. So it's slightly different if you're self-employed. And it will be similar if you're working abroad. They can't do it automatically, so they will expect to have an arrangement with you, and you have to maybe do some sort of direct debit type scenario into their account. So it's linked to your salary, so if it goes up or down, your repayments follow. Hello?
Does the NHS fund also apply for
Medicine students. Yeah. Okay, yeah, they're a bit of an unusual bunch. Okay, so if you're a medic, if you're coming here to study medicine, then your funding is interesting. You start off for the first 4 years applying to Student Finance England. And then in the final year, you apply to the NHS. So it's just, we just like to keep you on your feet, you know, make sure you're unsure of these things. So you have to go through Student Finance England to start with. You get there, they will only fund a student for a maximum of 4 years, so you take all of that from them, and then what's ever left on your course is something then you apply to the NHS for. And so that year, the NHS year, they pay your fee on your behalf, you access a bursary from them, which the amount, if you're eligible for this living cost support, the amount depends on family income. They have a grant that they pay you of £1,000 if you're eligible. And that element of funding, the NHS elements that I've just described, are not loans. You don't pay those back. But on top of that NHS funding on that particular year, you can apply for a small loan from Student Finance England just to give you some extra. So you might have the two things going at the same time, but it's very special rules. But yeah, if you're a medic, you start off with Student Finance England. And you know, as I say, depending on your eligibility, you might just be attracting help with your fees, or you might be attracting fees and living cost support. Well, if that's it, then all I have to do now is wish you all the best for your forthcoming years with us. And, you know, because of the nature of the work I do, dealing with people with problems, all I can say is I hope that I don't have to see you in the nicest possible way. But as I say, if anything needs clarifying, do get in touch, look at the resources, and hopefully that will really set you up to get on and focus on your course. Okay, thank you.